Touching on what David said there.
Could we just say who we are?
Sorry, I'm Andy Morrison, New Nicotine Alliance. I'm lead for Scotland, and it's nice to be here today. Touching on what David said, the bad press, it's obviously doing an awful lot of damage, as we can see by the results of how many people still think it's getting worse. But what can we do to redress this? Because the problem is, these headlines go out there, and they are front page news. Then we'll get good people, I'll cite Linda Bald for instance, who will come along and rebut that, but you're looking at a tiny little paragraph. What can we do to redress this balance and make sure that those people that are putting this stuff out there are taken to task?
Can I say that one? Yeah.
Yes, of course you can.
You can all say something.
Oh, yeah.
This question has actually been posed by a mutual acquaintance of ours, who is of Scottish origin, to a brief friend of his. And he says what it's going to need is for someone who is still smoking and who has recently contracted a disease that may or may not be ultimately fatal, but which can 100% be put down to smoking, who was put off switching to e-cigs by the information put out by specific persons. That person can then sue those specific persons, and they will, he feels, have a very good case. That might then make people think twice about spouting the lies that they appear to want to spout.
Okay, Francis, you have a take on this?
Yes, it's a kind of off. It's kind of on the subject, but it isn't. I think I'm quite optimistic that we don't have to kind of worry as much as we might think we do about the press reports, because I think, in my experience, kind of your ordinary people are much more cynical about what's in the press than we might think, and I find that the people who say, oh, it's much worse for you than it says so in the paper, are either never smokers who say that, so to people who don't smoke and don't vape and have read that. Or often they're people who are not wanting to quit smoking, and who then say that, I'm not going to try eating because they're just as bad, sort of thing. The people who do want that I meet who do want to quit smoking are actually not actually too bothered about what they read in the paper. They're more bothered about what Dave next door or their cousin down the road or whoever, or their boss at work, what their experience has been, and whether they've had an e-cig and they've had an amazing experience and they can breathe now, whereas they couldn't, they can run up a flight of stairs they couldn't before. So that kind of word of mouth thing I'm seeing as being kind of really powerful, and so I'm kind of not as panicked about I'm not saying that it's a good thing the press says all these scare stories, but I do think we have to kind of we have to trust people as well to actually have a lot more common sense than we might credit them with, and the kind of bush telegraph of seeing people around you who are clearly more healthy and able to do things they couldn't do before is actually really powerful.
I think it while I agree with you to some degree, my experience has been there's a bike club, motorcycle club that I go to on a Wednesday night and a Sunday night, and overwhelmingly the attitude I get from people there is, they'll bloody kill you, them son, you'd be better off smoking than using one of them. Now it's fairly obvious that I'm not in the peak of physical fitness, I ain't running any marathons, and they haven't known me long enough to know that I was a wheezing wreck when I was carrying gear up into Steels. As far as they're concerned, oh no, the Daily Mirror said that, and they'll kill you outright, they will, in a fortnight, they'll kill you, get off them, get up, back on the fags. So go get. Helen can bear me out on that, you've heard it.
Any thoughts, Richard?
Yeah, maybe just from the more academic side of things. So I think there's two maybe aspects that are feeding into the kind of the papers that are in the scientific journals. I think one factor is research impact. So researchers these days, particularly in the UK and other areas, part of their kind of rating us on how the research actually has an impact in the real world, so they have to write a case report for that. And it's really nice, being very cynical about it, if they can have some eye-catching headlines that get a lot of attention, and then they can say, well, this story has had a lot of research impact, or that's very crudely, but so I think a lot of people are twisting the science out of context to try and maybe for self-worth. And the other thing is, I think funding might not help that much, and maybe not so much in the UK, but I think maybe in the US, for example, I think some of the questions that are being asked and the funding, for example, is focused on looking at the risks of vaping rather than looking more balancedly. So they're maybe being set up in the first place to have the outputs that they're having just by the nature of the funding that they've had in the first place.
Jack?
What I can say is that the press is looking for bad news. So they will never report good news. It will change when the majority of journalists will have switched to vaping. Then it will change.
Good.
They will go to other catastrophes.
Okay, who else wants to jump in? Yes, yeah.
Just so I'm Catherine from Fresh, which is a tobacco control programme funded by local authorities. We take quite a pragmatic approach to electronic cigarettes, and what concerns us, and it's on a similar vein, but it's the misperception among health professionals around the harms of nicotine, and kind of thinking what strategies can be best implemented to make sure that they as an absolute target, as well as obviously the general public, but they as a key target.
Yeah, and so the confusion between smoking and nicotine causes cancer, which health professionals might say.
I can say that's exactly why I started these training that I'm doing, not only for vape shops, but also for health professionals. Because, well, most of the professionals that are working now have not been trained on nicotine dependence, tobacco dependence. They've been trained on tobacco disease. They don't know anything about nicotine and the dependence process and how to help smokers. We have a lot of, we see a lot of things, but it's not only vaping. I mean, it was the same when we used an RT. When you have problems with pregnant women, that their gynecologist or general practitioners says, well, you're better on 5 cigarettes a day, so you're not stressed, you will not stress the baby. We have exactly the same problem with vaping. So it is important that, and I think the most important thing is that vaping has a recognition at the higher level of authority. That's how we can influence, I think, those health professionals. As long as there's no clear signal from health authorities, public health, and regulatory bodies, and etc., there will always be some people with suspicion.
Yeah, Richard, what's your experience talking to other dentists? What are the most common things that they would raise, or the most common misconceptions?
Yeah, so I run several kind of courses for dentists. I've been around South East Scotland and the North East, and you sound like you're running a bit of a pitch during the session, because that you have to change a lot of people's opinions during it. They come in with very negative views about nicotine and e-cigarettes, and just like the survey kind of really highlighted. Not everyone. Some people have actually picked up the Public Health England's guidance document, actually quite surprising, and some people are aware of that, but not the vast majority. I'm not sure really how you influence it more broadly than just running lots of training courses, but I don't know who runs that. Just keep chipping away at it is kind of one approach.
And what's your experience been?
I mean, one of our biggest priorities is making sure that everyone in the NHS system tries to get people off tobacco.
Yeah. Off smoking or off tobacco?
Well, we'll say smoking, tobacco, but yes.
Okay.
But what we don't want them to do is, if that person might be interested in switching to a less harmful alternative, is to put kind of doubt in their mind about making that switch. So we've got, I think there's quite a lot of challenges that we've got, but that is kind of a key thing for us to.
There's a lot of uncertainty amongst people, professionals you work with, about them recommending e-cigarettes as a route off. Is that anybody else's experience?
Yeah. I'm amazed how much you know about electric cigarettes, and I kind of thought you was coming out of my head. I was not a volunteer stopping smoking. I loved my cigarettes, all 40 of them a day. But working in the field of drug and alcohol addiction, it became very obvious to me that this is probably the best thing I've ever seen, because my daughter, the reason I stopped, my daughter moved in with me pregnant, and the health professionals were telling her passive smoking was damaging the fetus. Very, very begrudgingly, I found that little cigarette that you found, and I puffed on 10, 15 of them a day, and I had 25 on top of the telly for when she went. But it took a year, as it does, and I just didn't start again. I've been smoking electric cigarettes since 2010, and I started in my groups for drugs and alcohol, because you're not allowed to smoke tobacco in Redcar or Cleveland in buildings. So I would vape, and all the people in the group, what's that? Can I have a go? And in my first group, within 4 months, 17 out of 20 addicted people who were addicted to tobacco as well stopped. And that's now in excess of 200 people I work with for other addictions who've stopped. But when I first went to the professional services, all that information, it's just as bad. I now know they're starting to come around. And from there we went on from the market stall to the community centre to the boot stall to we opened one of the very first shops in the UK. We now have 2 shops in our area. We have 2 different areas, and we regularly give away electric cigarettes to people. And our best way is through families, family members. My dad came here, my sister came here. But the link is between the health professionals. How do we get that?
Yeah, does anybody else want to jump in on this?
I'm Joanna Feeney. I'm from the Middlesbrough Redcar and Cleveland Stop Smoking Service. And I mean, just to give you a bit of background, we've actually been running some pilots with some e-cigarette shops where we've been giving away free starter kits to people accessing the services. Initially, we thought we would have our hands bitten off, that they would all go straight away. And it didn't really work out like that. And I think part of it goes back to what Jaques was saying in terms of not everybody who wants to quit smoking using an e-cigarette wants to come to a stop smoking service. So we've been working with a couple of shops, trying to do training in the same way that we train our pharmacies to provide support in their environment, in their setting. So I suppose my question is, how can you spread that? How can we actually engage independent vape shops into a more kind of consistent approach to give out that right message to actually help people who don't want to come through the traditional stop smoking services?
Yeah, there are a couple of things going on up there. One is that the reorientation of services, because you used to wait for people to come into you, but now there's a lot going on outside there, and maybe you've got to go out and engage and interact. But how can you best work with perhaps vape shops? They become, you become partners, but they also don't necessarily know what they're doing, do they? I mean,
it's a tough question.
A vape shop
tough question,
staff
but I think,
good at doing this, aren't they?
I think you're doing the right thing, and I think that there should be some kind of, referral in one way or the other. I mean, if a vape shop is trained and see that, well, these smokers will be very hard to switch, maybe that person will need some support. They might tell them that if they need something more to stop, or to switch, I prefer switch than stop. Then they might find something else. But I think also that smoking cessation specialists, stopping smoking services, everywhere in the world have to change gear. For me, smoking is not a disease. Stop treating people like if they were ill. Some get ill, but it's a behavior. And just do what you can. But it's obvious for me that vape shops are the new place where most smokers will be oriented and helped.
There's a question here, Francis. You may want to come in a minute about Poundland advice. But in a minute. But there's a question here. I think is the same sort of area.
I'm Linda Seary. I'm a public health specialist, and I'm the Commissioner of Stop Smoking Services in Newcastle. And we have work going on, and that has gone on for 18 months, Richard, about that, around working with hospital departments. Now, this is not top down, this is bottom up, trying to meet top down, you know, but the top down has been slow. So, you know, we've been working with different departments, and the dental hospital, rheumatology, you know, you've got the community dental hospital, you've got ophthalmology, you've got the main outpatients. We're doing all that, but what is a consistent thing that we are finding that our stop smoking advisors have to do, because part of negotiation is to go in and talk to the consultants and specialist nurses, because we want people to be referred into the stop smoking service for support in our small way. So let's do that, and that's fine. But what's consistent is you've got to challenge the thinking around e-cigarettes, because it's very, very mixed, and we have had uphill battles with regard to e-cigarettes in maternity even, and just, you know, and that's to do with everyone approaches this differently, and the thing is, but you have to lay the foundations, and we found in Newcastle that we're doing it department by department, you know what I mean, trying to get people on board, but we have to really challenge the thinking, because it's this no consistent messages, but in a way, society speaking, it is the chosen, you know, NRT product, which is fine, there's no problem with that. But we have to be fleet of foot as well around the consistent messages.
That's very important about that ground level, bottom up. I mean, I gave up with my Director of Public Health colleagues. I thought we're not going to make much shift there, but you know, you get things introduced at a doing level, at a practical level, and that leads to change. Sorry, who wanted to come in here?
Well,
go on the panel, Dave.
If I can just dive in on this, because the original question was how do you go about helping? I've done this a few different times. If you're a vapor, do me a favour and hold up your primary device in the air so everybody can see it, please. Just hold it up so that everybody can see it. Like, there's no two alike there. And I'm going to bet there's no two flavours alike. Thanks, folks. Well, yeah, but the fact of the matter is we could have had somebody with cigar likes. And one of the challenges that I think a lot of places face, and again, this is where the pleasure principle kicks in. You cannot account for everybody's desires. You can't do a one-size-fits-all. Somebody keeps coming up and saying to me, well, not just somebody, loads of people, what's the best e-cig to get a start with? I don't know. I haven't got a clue. What flavour do you like? Well, what flavours can you... All right, let's start with Marmite. Do you like Marmite? No, can't stand it. Good. Then you're going to love apple. Oh, I like apple. Well, you want an apple juice. How many a day do you... I mean, the questions are endless, aren't they? It would take me and Andy, and we've been around for how long now? 8-9 years, getting on 4. It would take us ages to sit down and tell somebody what e-cig they would want to buy, based on just what they're telling us.
Yes, but I mean, you're sort of at the Jeremy Clarkson end of vaping. You know, like it's the when I listen to the conversations, I can't follow them basically. But you know, there are masses of people out there who would like an entry level, like to get in, and how do you get them in without having to go through?
The thing is though, Gerry, and this is, I mean, we've got to acknowledge this. There's only a third of smokers haven't tried e-cigs, and there's nowhere near 2/3 of smokers are using them. Yeah. And the ones that have tried e-cigs and no longer use them have tried something that they find unpleasant, not pleasant enough.
Well, it's either that or it didn't work for them, or they didn't learn the new relationship, the new way of using it. Jack, you wanted to come in on this?
I want also to point out something. The smoking cessation field, I've just said, should change gear. That's the only domain of addiction where we ask people abstinence, full abstinence. Most smoking cessation specialists will ask people to quit nicotine as well. That's ancient time. In any other addiction domain, we are on harm reduction or controlled consumption. Who cares if people use nicotine for life? Nicotine is not more dangerous than caffeine. It's just that it just happened that it's not in the society as a nice product because of smoking.
But you believe that, but then many people would say, but they're still addicted to it. They shouldn't still be using it.
They're not addicted. They're not addicted to it. This is a point I want.
Inverted commas, they're
this
not.
is a point.
But,
Yes,
but
I
there's
want to
a
raise
very
as
strong
well.
conception, and I was struck by this, and we held a meeting in Liverpool, which was the home of harm reduction, and many of the audience were from addiction services, very involved in methadone and all the rest of it, and they would say, yeah, but if you start using e-cigarettes, you're still addicted to nicotine. And I thought, where do I go from there? But how do you deal? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, a little word on this. For me, nicotine is addictive in a fag. It's not addictive when it's used with a different system, with vaping, with NRTs, everything. I mean, we're then in a dependence process, not addiction. Addiction is dangerous.
Bobbing to say something. Could you just explain, as a neuroscientist, addiction to cigarettes and addiction or dependence or liking for nicotine, the difference?
Well,
because that's something that a lot of people don't get, because nicotine is in both, so why is it the same or is it not the same? In a neuroscientist, but 101 level, please, for those of us who are not neuroscientists.
What counts mainly to make nicotine addictive in cigarettes is the speed of absorption and the speed, the rapidity of the effects. The shorter the time between the behavior and the reward, the more addictive is the drug. Inhalation is the fastest route to bring a drug to the brain. That's why crack is more addictive, more addictive than cocaine used other ways. So the combination of these, plus the fact that smoking is dangerous for health because you have a lot of disease at the end of the road, makes the difference between addiction and dependence. I am dependent on caffeine. I drink coffee. I'm dependent on nicotine as well. And nicotine is also protecting. Nicotine is used in Parkinson's disease, could be used in Tourette syndrome, could be used in schizophrenia, depression. I mean, there's a lot of domain where nicotine could be used but has not because nothing. Pharmaceutical industry is behind big drugs and so on. So it is difficult, and still also because nicotine is still demonized as the stuff you find in tobacco.
Okay. First time I've been at an event where the staff have had to put more logs on the fire to warm the room up. So and there are some more logs just there, Jaques, if you want to put some more on. I know some questions here, and but I do want Francis to come in, and then I'll come to you, Francis.
Yeah, 2 quick points, just on Jaques' point. I mean, Jaques put the scientific point of view, I want to put the kind of cultural point of view, which is simply that yes, addiction, you're basically saying nicotine addiction is not a problem, and you're right, but I think we have to be aware that for a lot of people to conceive of themselves as addicted is a problem, and therefore these are the people saying, if I'm addicted to these things, it's just as bad, and it's too simple to say. We just say to them, oh, it's fine to be addicted to e-cigarettes, because the concept of addiction and the word addiction, addict, for a lot of people is stigmatized, and it's no use just saying it's okay, because people don't feel it's okay, and therefore they...
But do you see the same for people who drink coffee?
No, but it's not. This is not what I think. This is what people, people say to me, that they are not comfortable feeling that they are an addict, and I know it's not rational, but it's cultural, but it's still, it's still a big barrier.
I don't think it's cultural. I think it's been done on purpose by the anti-smoking movement.
Oh well, whatever the reason. I mean, I'm just saying that we can't just wish it out of existence. But the other point I wanted to make with the lady over there was I think there is something practical we can do, or we, somebody, maybe GFN can do, is I think in terms of the advice that people get and working with smoking cessation, I think a lot of the vape shops that I talk to are very unclear about the TPD and actually are much more worried about it than they should be in terms of advertising. So, for instance, one will say to me, this tobacco industry owned e-cig, why do they have a huge hoarding advert, and they have a huge advert on a bus, and they have a huge, we can't, we're not allowed to. And I said, well, you are allowed to. You're allowed to have that. You're not allowed to. You could do adverts on bus stops or whatever. That is allowed, but they don't actually know what's allowed or isn't. So the independent vape shops are not using the advertising which is available to them, and they also are not doing things like, for instance, we're talking about them going into this unemployment centre and giving people advice about, for instance, people were using the same coil for 6 months, but they didn't realise that you had to change it, and they thought it tasted disgusting because it was supposed to taste disgusting and didn't work, etc. And they felt that the vape shop said, we couldn't go in there because that might be advertising, and we might get done by trading standards. And actually, that's very unlikely to happen. But people have been so kind of scared by it that they're now avoiding giving advice, even basic advice, because of concerns. And that's something that that there could be a kind of advice to vape shops on what they are allowed to do, because there are a lot of things they are allowed to, and there are a lot of things that are unclear, but in practice nobody's going to care or mind or prosecute. Don't you think that's the case, Gerry? I mean, I don't know what GFN view on this is.
We don't have a view.
You don't. NNA's view then.
Can I just have one final point about, we're talking about how healthcare professionals and how we can make a difference there. So in our survey of 200 dentists or dental professionals, we posed a question, would you recommend e-cigarettes in this scenario? And we got a certain answer. And then we said, if there was a licensed product, and I'm going to move away from Dave here, if there was a licensed if there was a licensed product, what would their view be? And it doubled the amount of healthcare professionals who would be happy to recommend it. So I agree, it might not be ideal, but from a healthcare professional point of view, if there was a licensed product that they could almost prescribe.
They're all licensed.
No, medically licensed by them HRA.
They're not medicines, they never were medicines.
Well, there is one that's got medicines
license.
licensed.
I'm going to bring this gentleman in. You're very patient, and give you a turn to say
I think
something.
the answer's, I think it's fairly simple. He just picked up on it. There's no, when it comes to health professionals, they've constantly been working on an evidence-based process when it comes to treatments, and there isn't that evidence base, in my opinion, that they are safe and effective, which is why health professionals in general are going to hesitate to promote them as much, because the evidence base isn't there. I understand you obviously know quite a lot about e-cigs, and what you say is great about e-cigarettes, but when it comes to health professionals, I'm not saying this is my opinion, it needs to be written down in papers and for someone to say, there you go, there's your evidence.
So that's exactly what I'm trying to do now, working in the vape shops from time to time. I have now a questionnaire and a SEO monitor. So I'm asking all new smokers coming in and starting vaping to fill in the questionnaire, blow in the machine, and when they come back 3 weeks later or months later and so on, having a follow-up questionnaire and so on. And that will help me to convince health professionals that yes, it works. I have a proof.
Sorry, there's a lady there, then you, please. And there are lots of people wanting to speak.
I'm Helen, I work with Hartlepool, North Team Hartlepool, NHS Stop Smoking Service, as a pregnancy advisor. And I work predominantly with the deprived group, and I get them at a certain level. And even this morning when I was there, I mean, there's a few issues that aren't, I mean, first off, for most of them to swap to e-cigarettes, to find the one they want, they don't have the financial resources to do that. That's number one. Two, one said to me this morning, well, you know, by the time I buy the liquid and that, it's so expensive, at least I know when I have my cigarette, I like that. So there's those two issues, and I do advise them when they buy it not to buy them from poorer areas because of the safety issues and that sort of stuff. But you know, it's all right to say we're going to promote them to do that, and yes, we know that for baby. For me, the thing is for the baby. So e-cigarettes are much safer for baby. But you know, sometimes we're putting this pressure, but we can't supply them with anything free other than nicotine replacement and support.
But
So we,
So there's evidence and what.
Yeah,
Just bring is your point related to this?
in terms of
Or is it a
price,
different one? You wait, you can prepare to wait. Jaques.
in terms of price, I'll compare a 10 milliliter bottle with what they smoke.
yeah, but I'm talking about the actual the machine, the contraption, depending what it is. And of course, they live in an environment of like iPhones and everything, and they don't want to be walking to be seen with the cheapest, or they also want to fit in that group that they live in. So they have got those other extra barriers.
Well,
in that area.
In Leicester, what the Stop Smoking Services in Leicester did was to do a deal with one of the local shops, and they came up with a voucher for 30 quid. And what needed to happen was you went into your Stop Smoking Service, they would give you the voucher for 30 quid.
Then we're promoting a company, aren't we? We're not. We're professionals. We're not out there to promote
Well,
companies. We have to be fair across
with the
board.
best will in the world, you know, you can't have it both ways. You can either have an agreement with all of the local shops, which is not impossible to do, or you just can't. You know, I know you can't prescribe them, and I know you can't give them out. All I'm doing is pointing out to you that in Leicester they found a way around that, and where there's a will, there's a way.
We're kind of stuck between medical care system, which is used to delivering particular services, products and so on, which are also of known quality and being through the MHRA. It's a bit like saying somebody, well, you should ride a bike, and they say, well, I can't afford a bike. How do I get started? So questions there. Come back to evidence in a minute, I think, because it is an important one. But there's a question waiting here.
It wasn't a question, it was just a comment. And it was just, we're managed by senior managers, so to speak, and it all depends what their views are as to what we say to people on the ground, and it's like, you must say this. You can't recommend them, you can't condone them. But so my way around that is I'll give the NCSCT report and tell them to read that. I'll say, but another comment I was going to make is people are always saying, well, you don't know what they're going to do in the long term. By the way, I'm a supporter. I'll put myself out there and say I do support e-cigarettes, and I think it's a great way for people to quit smoking and get them off tobacco. So it's just comments.
So constraints on what you can say. I've heard of people actually saying, I'm not allowed to tell you what to do, right on a piece of paper and give it to them. But it is difficult, because you're a medical care professional and you've got responsibilities and you've got certain protocols to follow and all the rest of it. So,
I had a comment on this. It's not a solution that I propose, but it's what happened to be in France. A bunch of vapors once started an association called Lavab du Coeur. The
Vape of the heart.
Vape of the heart. We have the equivalent for food in France for many, many, many years. People getting free food. So a bunch of vapors started this, and they collect donation from professionals, from vape shops, who have always, liquid. They won't sell old e-cig that won't sell, and so on. So they have donations, and they go in, and they go to work, particularly with those people working with addiction and poor people and so on. And they start them on e-cig. They give advice, and they provide the liquid later on.
I don't know how popular it is, but
you have to have a lot of free will, etc., etc. It's not the solution, but that's something.
They've done something similar in New Zealand with Vape It Forward over there. There are 2 Vape It Forward organisations over there. And again, as Jaques says, there are vendors, dealerships, whatever, that have got surplus stock. So where the TFV4 has been supplanted by the TFV, the TFV4 is not going to sell, so they might get 200 TFV4s, they might get Lord knows what there's a version 2 of, and they're giving those to Pay It Forward. And it's run by Rebecca Rufio-Collins, who also does Vape to Save, and she's specifically concerned with the Maori population, and they are now starting to see the smoking prevalence in the Maori population dropping because of all this going in. Because they're in the same boat, they can't officially do it either. But you've got to try and find the loophole. And then crawl through it and hope nobody kicks you in the backside while you do it.
I mean, it happens in a small way, I think, informally in the UK as well, because I mean, in Manchester, I know, mentioning no names, I know of shops that will kind of have old stuff that they'll then give to organisations which work with unemployed people who are, So, but it's very much a kind of individual. So you talk to a person talks to another person that they know in a shop, and then they have that conversation. It's not a kind of project like the Live du Coeur, but it's worth having that conversation, because some of the shops are, obviously if it means that they then get customers in the longer term, then that's good for them. So.
Richard,
can I just touch on the evidence-based question, coming back to your point, which I think is really key, and I think that's going to be the main thing that will help shift healthcare professionals. We obviously have things like the Cochrane review that's out there about, are e-cigarettes useful for helping people to stop smoking, which is quite small at the minute, 2 studies, but there's 14 or 16, whatever it was, in the pipeline. So hopefully as things come out in the next round, the next time they repeat it, there should be some pretty robust evidence there. And I think we just have to keep following it and doing the research, hopefully like I'm doing in oral health and medics are doing elsewhere to get an evidence-based viewpoint and a balanced viewpoint, because I think it's the only way you probably get health professionals involved.
Part of the problem is there is a lot of evidence, but in the way in which the NHS assesses evidence and through NICE and so on, it doesn't always necessarily the evidence that counts for NICE pronouncements on this. The question at the back, but I just want to make a point about interactions between clients and professionals, and I don't know if this is apocryphal or I made it up, but when you go to the doctor and there's this, you get paid for professionals sometimes get paid for brief intervention. So do you smoke? Well, you should stop first. So it gets ticked off somewhere and somebody gets reimbursed for that. But I'm sure in France there was an idea to turn this around, that the vapors were given leaflets and ideas so that when you went to the doctor and they said, you're a smoker, you say, no, I use electronic cigarettes and this is what you should know about them. So you get the vapors to train the professionals. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. It is true. It's a good one. It's a good one. So there's a man in the blue shirt at the back with a beard.
I'm Paddy Costello, I'm the other half of the Global Forum on Nicotine. I'm going to drop my colleague in it a bit here, because I think one of the things that you can actually quite usefully do as stop smoking services is learn from some of the issues that drug services in the past have had to face whilst working within the National Health Service. And just one example I would give is that in a lot of drug services, people were very, very happy for drug workers to be handing out needles to people to use street drugs. The one thing that was much safer than people actually using needles would have been to use foil and to smoke heroin. But the Misuse of Drugs Act, actually prevented drug workers from giving out kitchen foil so that people could just, a very simple way of reducing the harm and the way people use drugs. And Gerry and I were actually involved in a campaign to actually have that section of the law changed. And we're actually successful in having that done. But during that time, some of the imaginative ways that people gave people foil, they were running cooking classes in the drug service, so they were giving people foil to take home to practice with. It's about, I mean, the NHS, God, we all love it a bit, but my God, it's monolithic and dreadful at times. And it is actually working against the best interests of people. And some of the simplest solutions are prohibited possibly because they're too simple and because doctors aren't in control of them. And I think that there's look back at all of that. Don't look at all of this in a state of sort of gloom. I mean, Dave was talking there about what Louise Ross in Leicester has achieved through the stop smoking services there. And I mean, I think the ultimate thing she's achieved there is they've got the big signs on the bus stops with a big watch on it, and underneath it says time to switch. And there's an explanation that e-cigs are safer than smoking. And I think there's an awful lot of evidence out there. And it's about turning the tables on your management and actually telling them you're wrong. The evidence is actually building. And the evidence is building by people taking risks and doing something that's a bit radical. And that's what drug services had to do. And now that's mainstream. And now that's accepted. But you're not going to have handed to you a ready-made evidence base that will stand rigorous interrogation. because it doesn't. This is building up as we go along. This is a relatively new phenomenon, and if we wait another 10 years to have a robust evidence base, how many people are going to bloody die as a result of that? I really think people have got to start taking on some of these ridiculous rules and regulations that work against. They're counterintuitive.
Well said.
And it's a pity because, I mean, with all the work you've done with drugs, I mean, with IV drugs and so on, and the fact that even in France, I mean, self-support and expert users are part of the process. How can't we see that we can do the same with vaping for smoking?
I just wanted to kind of weigh in there, because I think there is appetite within Stop Smoking Services, within local authority commissioners, to work with vape shops, independent vape shops. And I think that, you know, logistically it's difficult because particularly in Middlesbrough, Redcar and Cleveland, where I'm from, there's probably, you know, in Middlesbrough within a 2-street radius, there's about 40 vape shops, and there's a lot of them to kind of get around on an individual basis to talk to individuals. But I suppose my question goes to Francis in terms of, does the pound shops and does that undermine the appetite to work together, because there is this cheap one, especially in the deprived area, which is where people will go to?
I think knowing vape shop owners the way I do, if you've got as many as that in Middlesbrough, firstly, congratulations. There wasn't as many as that when I was doing that. Send them all a letter, give them sandwiches and coffee, maybe a glass of beer, get them all together and have a natter. You'll be surprised how much they'll help. And they will pull together.
Absolutely, and we've done that, but I think it's more the pound shops, because the people we get coming into our service, they're buying their experiences that they've bought them from Home Bargains, they've bought them the disposable ones.
I think it's difficult because, I mean, I'm nowhere near conclusion on the research I'm doing with retailers, if you like to put it. But there's a kind of, I'm definitely seeing different types of retailers. So there's the kind of, there's the supermarket that just has the, on the whole, they have the tobacco industry owned brands. There's the garage forecourt that have one particular brand that tends to dominate those. There's the discount shops that tend to have Vape 88, I forget what the name of the other one is, the pound shop that have got the Cloud 9. There's the, so there's a kind of, but also in the vape shops, in the specialist vape shops themselves, there's a kind of range. So there's a kind of, there's the one that's kind of very clinical and kind of mainstream and tries to look very kind of clean and bright and quite expensive actually. And some of them they go in and you'll say what would you recommend somebody coming in who smokes this much and wants to give up, and they'll start at kind of 35. So that's their kind of level. And then there's other ones where they're, for instance, I'm thinking one that's in a big shopping mall, but it's got a kind of like a market store, but in an inside thing. And they know that's not realistic, and they have a kind of starter kit, which is kind of a loss leader for £10. So they're much more aware of that sort of market. So the trouble is, it's difficult because out of those 40 vape shops, you're going to have the ones that don't want to look at anybody who's not going to spend 35 and preferably 150. And maybe the other stores are saying, oh, they're always kind of flogging £150 e-cigs to old ladies, and we don't approve of them because they're whatever. So they're all kind of saying things about each other. Some of them are really wanting the person to quit. Some of them are more focused on the profit. So I think it's very difficult. I don't think we can say all vape shops are marvellous and wonderful and trying to kind of save the world, because they're not. And some of them are very ill-informed, and some of them really don't care as long as they sell something quite expensive. So I can't say, oh, it's all really easy. I mean, they say you can send a letter, and you can, but I think we have to be aware that there is this kind of diversity of aims and a pitch, and they're like other shops. They're the shops are kind of, you've got the Sainsbury's and you've got the Lidl. It's like that with the e-cigs as well. And I think you're going to get a different kind of response from them. I know that's not very helpful, but hopefully when I get a bit further with it, I'm hoping to make this into some kind of useful information rather than just saying, oh, there's a lot of things around.
I think the variety in the vape shops can probably be a very good thing, because at the one end you've got Rolls-Royce and Range Rover, down at the other end you've got Skoda. Sorry, I'm not dissing anybody's car. by any stretch of the imagination. But they've each got different things to bring to the table. And if my knowledge of Middlesbrough folks is anything to go by, given that I used to work in the unemployment benefit office down there a million years ago, they're cracking folks, and if they can help, they will. And you know that. As far as the pound shop e-cigs are concerned, the Chinese knockoffs of Chinese knockoffs of Chinese knockoffs, but they work. And given that the juices have now all got to be notified and tested the same way as all other juices have, there shouldn't be an issue with the quality of those.
No, no, it's very nice.
Well, yes, but like we've said, do you like Marmite?
Yeah, but no, I doubt you'd have many people who like the Cloud 9. But anyway, we won't go into that.
Oh, I've had the Cloud 9 vanilla's lovely. Their alcohol is crap.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's what everyone's complains about.
Yeah.
A question at the front, or a comment at the front here.
I'm Sir Hilbati, I'm consultant in public health in Newcastle City Council, and I'm a medic. I just, when you're pushing uphill, you sometimes don't notice you got to the top.
Mm-hmm.
The Royal College of Physicians have issued a report recently which said they call for the use of e-cigarettes, nicotine replacement therapy, and other non-tobacco nicotine products to be promoted as widely as possible as a substitute for smoking.
Yes.
The Royal College of General Practitioners have said that even whilst we should ideally defer for more evidence, we should not. It shouldn't be deferred while we're waiting for the publication for the research, because it's clearly beneficial. The BMA is just about to revise its guidance, saying that it's still in development, but
it's still my beating heart.
Yeah, that actually a harm minimisation approach is better. They've debated discussions, for example, that even smoking in public spaces is okay, perhaps not in public transport. The biggest concerns around take up by children, I think, is the biggest issue that they've got, and making sure that there's a universal quality of product. That's where their concerns are coming in. So I think actually, and I know that we've got discussions in Newcastle about doing what Leicester did, so I think you might have just got to the top of the hill.
I think it's a very good point. I mean, we could not even be having this sort of discussion in some countries. We wouldn't have got this far, and we are a lot better off in many places. In, for example, Australia, where nicotine is illegal, and the fine for the use, sale, or possession of nicotine is similar to this as for possession of heroin. So we've got it pretty good, but we always want it better. So anybody want to come back on the
well,
points?
I mean, the fact that the BMA is likely to change its position if and when that comes about, I'm buying the drinks. I've been waiting for the BMJ to be supportive of e-cigs for an awful long time, and I've been extremely critical of them for not so doing, I'll freely admit.
So I think coming back to this issue about Poundland, what works. So we focus mainly the discussion today on e-cigarettes. The technology is moving on, and we will see a wide variety of new types of nicotine delivery devices in the next 5 to 10 years. We've got heat not burn, which we've not discussed today, but it's a way of getting people away from combustibles. The Swedish snus, which is illegal in Europe except in Sweden, and it comes in all sorts of forms. So this is actually a white tobacco-less snus, and it's cheap. It's actually the low tech. It's the green version, the green harm reduction approach to no batteries and all the rest of it. This is illegal here, but the New Nicotine Alliance, which Dave and I and Paddy are involved in, have joined the legal challenge against the ban on snus in Europe, which is now with the European Court of Justice, because we think that snus is an important additional harm reduction product, and it is cheap, and many people like it. And in Sweden, it's led to the lowest prevalence of smoking in Europe, which is now 5% amongst adults. And people use snus rather than smoke, and they don't go on to smoking. So we've got to look at other options, because the interest in e-cigarettes has shown a great appetite for harm reduction products, but we might not have the right ones or the right range yet. So I think that's that's looking to the future.
I do think, just building on that, Gerry, that people have got to accept that as smoking is obsoleted, people will continue to use nicotine and people will continue to start to use nicotine. And that this guy's the world expert. And if he says it's not a problem, it's not a problem. So we've kind of, yeah, today's kids are probably going to take e-cigs or snus or whatever else comes along up. But if they ain't smoking, so what? I think we've got to agree to that.
Okay. Good. Any other burning questions? Have I missed any?
I see what you did there. That was clever.
Sorry. You said, and from what the doctor in front said, with children, as regards to children, and with I work with families, and the mums have, it's not a research thing, but I get mums saying, they're young, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, they want an e-cigarette for Christmas because it's an accessory. Now, that's on scientific evidence, but it's what I hear, and that is one concern I have, because we don't want our children taking up smoking cigarettes at a young age ever. So with the same token, I wouldn't want my child taking up an e-cigarette at a young age either. So
but that's an issue of good parenting, though, isn't it? It is. It's
that's a whole different argument and debate, and I ain't going to that.
This might be another
I had my
tour.
first cigarette at 7.
So did I.
I was it.
I'm a smoker, but
There is sort of an issue about at what age does harm reduction begin, but I think if we get into these sort of areas, we're going to be another hour or two. And I don't know about you, but next time I'm getting a little bit cold here. And we have tea outside, and our speakers will be there, and we can chat and talk outside. But it's been a great afternoon, lots of really interesting points and discussion. And Paddy's making some sign to me about feedback forms. The feedback forms, please. If you could complete those. But I'd like to thank you all for coming and answer the questions you raised, and we'll cut ourselves and thank our 4 eminent speakers for all the ideas they've thrown at us today. So thank you.